Today we've got Catriona Boffard with us. She's an accredited clinical sexologist and psychotherapist as well as speaker. Welcome today. Thank you for joining us. I'd just like to hand over to you for an introduction.
Sure. You named it very briefly there. I'm a clinical sexologist and a psychotherapist and a trauma therapist. And a clinical sexologist bit means that I work clinically, i.e. I'm client-facing in the field of really psychosexual and relationship therapy. But I'm a specialist in the field of sexology, which is the specific study of human sexuality. I just got my doctorate in psychotherapy, specializing in...
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a big deal and long time coming. So that also is aspects of my work that I'm actively involved in academics and research and contributing to the knowledge that we have. I'm a podcaster as well. I have a much loved and much missed podcast called Asking for a Friend that kind of relates and covers all the topics associated to aspects of our lives that we feel very uncomfortable to talk about, particularly sex. I publish a lot academically. I publish a lot in kind of media, print, online. My mum and I have ADHD, and I think that those are all really important aspects for me that, I don't know, when I speak to people and I introduce myself, those are aspects I want them to know about who I am.
It's incredible. Let's chat about sex during the ages, or as I like to define it, sort of sex pre-baby and sex post-baby.
Okay. So yeah, I think, when you say sex during the ages, I think of across our lifespan, but when you're more specific about it like that with pre-baby and post-baby, I really don't think that our episode, we could take an entire episode to talk about it, because
Absolutely.
There is so much that can be said. And really, if I'm going to try and refine it to a few thoughts or a few points, I would definitely speak to the fact that we would be naive to think that our experience of sex isn't going to change and isn't going to be different before we start a family versus after. And that isn't just in terms of if you've been the person who's birthed a child. In same-sex couples, if two women or two men are experiencing the trials and tribulations and sleep deprivations that come with becoming a parent, it doesn't mean they're not affected. So I think that if people can go into that phase of life understanding that there are going to be drastic changes to the way they experience sex, everything from the sensation to their motivation to have it, their interest in having it, their energy level to have it. It can be quite protective for a partnership. And after children arrive and after you start a family, your ability to, one, have time, and two, have energy is vastly different than before children arrive. And that's pretty much regardless of your age. If you're having kids in your 20s, kids in your 30s, kids in your 40s, it's the same. Absolutely, the older you get, we do find we have less energy, or we do need to recover and rest more. It doesn't matter what age you start a family, moving through those different stages is going to affect your kind of sexual dynamic in a relationship and the way that you feel about your body. And particularly for the person who's had to carry the pregnancy and birth a child, like if I'm thinking about a lot of women that I speak to, they just say to me their body's not theirs. It feels like it doesn't belong to them anymore. It feels vastly unfamiliar and different from what it felt like before. And I think that the expectation and narrative around like bouncing back is so unhelpful, as is the kind of expectations that at 6 weeks postpartum, we're absolutely fine. I mean, at 6 weeks postpartum, I wanted to gouge my eyes out with a spoon more than I wanted to have sex, So the reality is that for new parents who are sleep deprived, if you don't expect things to change, you're going to get a huge shock and you're going to not do yourself and your relationship any favors. And we have to consider where else we are connecting, where else we're creating kind of sexual moments, where eroticism exists. What's erotic for us that's outside of intercourse and having sex. So I think that in that particular stage of life, no matter the age, it is about understanding that there is a definitive need for understanding that it's going to be different, if that makes sense.
It does. It makes perfect sense. Okay, but why is it important to address or navigate gender identity?
So it's such an interesting question because I think that if you are if you identify as a man or a woman, and that is congruent or aligned with your sex, i.e. you were assigned female at birth and you have female organs, or you're assigned male at birth and you have male organs, I think you're actually in a very privileged position of not having to have ever considered your gender identity. And so what we call cisgender, i.e. your assigned sex at birth and the gender you feel you are, if they're congruent, then you are in a very privileged position of having never needed to consider what your gender identity is. But gender identity, it's such a fraught subject, and it's unfortunately a topic that becomes the scapegoat for so much that is going wrong in the world. Really, I saw a beautiful thing on an American talk show from a trans actress, Laverne Cox, who said, trans people are not the reason that your rent has gone up. Trans people are not the reason that the price of eggs is more. That's really not the reason. And yet I think that people who are feeling that their gender is different or is not aligned or not congruent with that they were assigned at birth, they're experiencing an immense amount of distress usually. And also anybody who's kind of questioning their gender identity, like, who am I really? We need to consider gender expression, like how we present ourselves outwardly to the world, as well as what we feel inside, who we feel we are inside. And the fact that there isn't just a binary of men and women. It's a very reductive and quite archaic way of thinking about people's ability to identify and experience authenticity within themselves.
Absolutely. Okay. In your opinion, what are the biggest misconceptions around sex and intimacy?
It just happens. It doesn't require effort. And that it should just be spontaneous. I think, I've been in practice for 14 years and I've heard those just countless times. I continue to hear them. And it is so far from reality. For most people who are in an established long-term relationship, they have to actually make quite a lot of effort to engage in having sex. And often so much pressure is placed in actually having it versus what they do in between having it. And usually there's a almost total kind of whiteout when it comes to communication around sex, and people often don't have the language to talk about sex. So that's the real challenge that people face, that actually we need to be talking about it with our partners more, but the challenge is that people don't have the words to talk about it and they feel deeply uncomfortable talking about it or naming things. And then further to that, they don't actually know what that is they want to name. They don't know what they like, or they don't think that they are allowed to like anything or can explore things that bring them a different type of pleasure. Sex that we see on screen, for the most part, whether it's been on movies, TV series, and porn, like, it's not the genuine representation of what sex actually looks like. So it's setting up our expectations that are going to be patients to a vastly different measure to what we're actually going to experience. And I think that if I were to hope that people would take anything away from this conversation, it would be that there's nothing wrong with them and that actually there's everything wrong with what they think sex looks like. Absolutely.
Okay, so in your opinion, let's chat about libido and sex drive.
So I speak quite openly about this, and I've spoken about it a lot on different platforms, that I very much am aligned with the school of thought. I don't believe there's such a thing as a sex drive, because a driver is something that keeps us alive. Our drive around hunger, if I'm hungry and I eat something, I'm not hungry anymore. So our drive is diminished. I'm thirsty, I drink something, I'm not thirsty anymore, it's diminished. Sex is not like that. Sex is quite the opposite. If it's pleasurable sex, the more you have it, the more you're going to want it. So ultimately, I think that if we consider sex not as a drive, but more as a pleasure incentivized system, that if it's good, we're going to want more of it. But it doesn't always mean that just because it's good, we want it. Just yesterday I was talking to a client about how, they said, when I do start having sex, I just think to myself, why don't I do this more often? And I hear that from so many people. And it's a very good example to help contextualize why we need to consider sex as something that requires effort and that requires our central nervous systems to be in a kind of calm and rested state, not in a hypervigilant, alert, on edge, anxious state. And that when it comes to libido, everybody's different. And again, I started this conversation talking about different stages of life. If we consider the context of a new parent, they're not sleeping, they're barely eating, they've got, baby fluids from vomit to poo all over them. They do not feel sexy. They do not leave the house. There's so many things that are totally, like, it's not erotic at all. There's no sexiness to it whatsoever. It's very undignified being a new parent sometimes.
Yes.
And having small children is a high demand on our nervous system. High. You can ask any parent with young children, or even like mid-aged children or young adults, like the schedules that you have to manage and the lunch boxes that you have to make. It doesn't afford our system much space for wanting sex. And so sex can often end up feeling like a total chore. It can end up feeling like something that is just the absolute last thing on our priority list. And if it's the only place that two people or one person feels closer to their partner, it becomes a really fraught thing. Where if it's not happening, if it's feeling like a space filled with rejection, a space filled with guilt, a space filled with worry, that's a big problem. That's going to be a big turnoff. So our libido is very dependent on our context, And further to that, it's also dependent on our sensory system. If you are somebody who struggles with loud noises and you have spent the afternoon at an event that is affronting, your nervous system from your auditory perspective, on your nervous system from every angle. When you leave, it doesn't mean automatically you're better. It actually means you probably need to go and lie in a calm, cold, quiet room for a while, or you need to go and engage with different sensory things. And so when it comes to sex and interest in sex as well, our desire for it, if your system has been overwhelmed by something like that, there's very little space for our system to get into a rest and digest and calm state, which is what we need our bodies to be in. So desire and libido, rather than libido and sex drive, is very complicated. And again, it's not what you see on screen. We do not just automatically feel like it at the same moment that our partner feels like it, and then we have an orgasm at the same time. It's really like a very romanticized view of what sex looks like. So I think that if your listeners can take away that sex is not a drive, because actually if it's great, the more we want it and the more we have it, the more we want, but it doesn't mean life can't get in the way. And equally, if we think about libido as a context-specific, nervous system-specific response that is kind of mediated by pleasure, and our specific tailoring to pleasure, because everybody's sense of pleasure is different, then it becomes clearly this super complex, nuanced thing to consider.
And then you want to throw in hormones into the mix and the fluctuations and everything. That's a whole other issue there. Okay,
absolutely.
fantastic.
And you throw disability into the mix, you throw a grief, a bereavement into the mix, all of these things, the biological that's going on in our bodies, the psychological that's going on internally in our nervous systems and our minds, and our social, which is our external environment in terms of our relationship stresses, our family, our work, it's what in my field we call it a biopsychosocial system.
Yes.
That we have to consider what's happening in all aspects of those things. It's vast and complex and nuanced.
Exactly. Okay, so the next question is about sexual kinks, and I tried to think about this myself and I got stuck, which just goes to show that maybe there are other listeners like me that don't really understand what that is.
Sure. And I think it is quite complicated, because I also think that kinks have been, for lack of a better word, like fetishized.
Yes, exactly.
Wow, I can't even get that out. Like kinks themselves have been put up on this like pedestal of like, oh, that's how you have good sex, is you get in like Christian Grey BDSM type sex. That is not a great representation of consent and negotiation and contracting. Anyway, it's a lovely, smutty novel. But kinks in themselves are actually so misunderstood that they often are correlated to, they often come with stigma, should I say. People are often experiencing a lot of shame around their kinks and are very tentative to explore their kinks unless it's in a kink safe space or with a partner who's allowing them to do so. And kinks is just actually all about our sexual preferences. It's all about our interests and preferences when it comes to sex. But if we're going to think about like a fetish, which is something that is a little bit more deliberate, a little bit more intentional, we can have a fetish for leather or lace or high heels. But kink is kind of our preferences of practice.
Okay.
And kink is not the problem when it comes to engaging in sex. Kink can be so pleasurable. Kink can be so affirming and validating for people in their relationships, in their emotional states. It can really help actually to bring about a difference in how they feel in themselves and how they feel with a partner. But I think that often people believe that is weird, or that is bad, or that is, there's a stigma associated to kinks that I think we need to try and understand is unhelpful when people are actually engaging in kinks in a way that is safe. We use an analogy when we teach our students that we want kinks to be safe, we want them to be sane, and we want them to be consensual. So safe is physically safe and emotionally safe. Sane is what you're doing is like reasonable. There's not the risk of death sort of thing, like with autoerotic asphyxiation, which is strangulation. And they're consensual, i.e. you've got two adults who have informed consent, i.e. they know what it is they are saying yes to. And that consent is not a given, it's an ongoing thing that's practiced in a kind of the process of engaging with kink. So I think that it's a very misunderstood space, and at the same time, for those who practice kink, can be an incredibly exciting and pleasurable and rewarding space to be in.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Okay, so let's chat about the study. I saw something on MDMA and sexual dysfunction, how it's sort of helping to alleviate that.
Yeah, so I mean, in the past, I'd say 5 to 8 years, there's been incredible acceleration of research around using substances like MDMA, ketamine, psilocybin, magic mushrooms in clinical settings, not recreationally,
yes,
with suitably trained clinicians and researchers to offer doses of these drugs, these substances, to help people overcome certain things. Depression is the biggest one that we've studied so far, PTSD as well. And now we're actually, more specifically, we can see how we can apply these types of approaches that aren't just about talking therapy. These drugs are able to get our minds into a very different space. They're able to unlock our ability to access things in our mind that our conscious brain says absolutely not, this is too overwhelming. So it kind of helps our system tolerate the processing of quite difficult things. And very often a sexual difficulty, I mean, I don't preference language like dysfunction, but a sexual concern or a sexual difficulty is very often associated to deep shame, trauma, anxiety, mood, relationship stress. I mean, very often it's not just, sex is not the problem, it's where it's showing up. And so, to give you an example, if I'm working with, let's say, a man who is struggling with getting an erection, and he's got performance anxiety associated to that, very often he is experiencing performance anxiety, fears of failure, fears of inadequacy, fears of not being good enough in many other areas of his life. It's just that this is where he notices it tangibly and literally. It shows up to him. So that's why it becomes this fraught space. So I think that we've got a lot more to learn, and yet I am so excited by all of the work coming out of the UK and the US, I think some in Australia as well, around using these substances in a clinical environment to support patients therapeutically.
That's actually incredible. What is the importance of experience orgasms, and what are some surprising factors that affect this?
Sorry, let me check. Did you ask if what is the importance of experiencing orgasms?
Of experiencing them, yes.
Got it. So that's quite an interesting question, because the first part of your question around what is the importance of experiencing them, it's quite a hard one to answer, because there are people who have never experienced an orgasm. They are absolutely fine. If you think about anybody who's taken a vow of celibacy, people of particular religious faiths, monks, nuns, if they have never experienced an orgasm, and their faith and their belief system means that engaging with sexual pleasure in their bodies goes against their belief system, they are fine. There is no difference to their longevity, to their day-to-day living, to their health than somebody who has an orgasm every day. So I don't think that it's fair for us to say that you have to have an orgasm in order to, qualify your experience as worthy. I think that actually even becomes quite dangerous in the pressure that it places on people. But what I will say is that people who I speak to and people who I work with, they always want orgasm. They want to have an orgasm. I don't really get clients who are people who've taken a vow of celibacy, because I'm a psychosexual therapist, and in doing that work, it's people who are engaging in sex. So
yes,
I'm speaking to people who want to have an orgasm, who privilege having an orgasm as the epitome of what the kind of pinnacle of their sexual experience. And while absolutely having an orgasm is great, and it's what a lot of people will equate to pleasure, if orgasm is your only measure of pleasure, then you have completely missed out on an entire other aspect of sexual interaction, either on your own or with partners, that may actually be really pleasurable. And there are a lot of couples where orgasm doesn't even happen and it's still considered pleasurable, like connection and sexual intimacy. So I think that orgasm is a fantastic thing if that's what you want. And if you are not able to achieve it, or you were able to achieve it before and you can't achieve it now, or you find you're frustrated and distressed because you can only achieve it by yourself but not with your partner. Usually a lot of those things create distress, and it's the nature of our culture being comparative and seeing it happen on screen, like particularly in porn, that makes us feel less than, and that's not helpful at all. That's not good for us to feel less than. I think that with regards to the first part of that question is that orgasm is such a subjective thing. There's no such thing as you should be able to have this type of orgasm versus that type of orgasm. If one woman says to me, I can only orgasm from my partner touching me on my clitoris, I say to them, okay, well, you are within the 99.9% of women, cisgendered heterosexual women out there, who find external stimulation preferable. That's the most reliable way.
Yes.
And so having that type of orgasm versus an orgasm during kind of penetrative sex or oral sex, they're not privileged. We're not trying to privilege any of them. But I think that, again, it comes down to pleasure. What's your most pleasurable experience? And if I have somebody says to me, well, it's definitely most pleasurable when it's kind of penetrative, or it's more pleasurable when it's on my own, that should be the measure of what matters. Having an orgasm in and of itself is very beneficial to our system. There have been pervasive narratives, doing the rounds for many years around, like, you shouldn't masturbate, you shouldn't have an orgasm, it's not good for you, it causes blindness. These are some of the old school ones, but also, like, it stops you wanting your partner or being able to perform, which is really unhelpful when you're with your partner. And actually science has shown us it's the complete opposite, that the more you are kind of enjoyably engaging in kind of any sexual activity that yields a sexual response in your body, the better it is for you and your partner. And if you are placing all of the responsibility to have an orgasm in your partner's court, you are doing something really unhelpful. You have to take responsibility for your own orgasm and perhaps be the one directing your partner on how it is that you have that orgasm. It's ultimately a choice. I know that might sound quite weird to a lot of people, but having an orgasm is ultimately a choice, and you can choose to kind of shift your brain into a space that's present, that's noticing the sensation, that's maybe engaging with fantasy, and you also have the choice to not have an orgasm. And I think some people will find that weird, because a lot of people see me because they can't have an orgasm and they would choose to have one if they could. Yeah. But it's your responsibility when it comes to pleasure. It's not your partner's or any partner's responsibility. There's a lot more to unpack there that I think, again, would yield a whole episode on, but I'll leave it there for now.
I'm sure. Okay, perfect. Let's chat about consistency and how that plays a role in a sexual relationship.
So when you say consistency, what do you mean? Because it's a broad term.
Consistency, it is both in communication and intimacy, not only sex, basically. So there's consistency within the pursuit of connection.
Got it. Yeah. And within, let's just say the partners, if we've got like a couple. Yes, I think that is one of the most important things. Like anything in life, it requires us to be consistent. If you want to see results, if you want to lose weight, you have to be consistent. That's actually the most important factor, is consistency. If you want to ensure that your kids know that you will show up for them, you have to be consistent, right? If you want to ensure that your friends will always turn to you or believe that they can call on you when they're in trouble, you have to be consistent. And so similarly, in a relationship, consistency, I just think it's one of the most valuable aspects of a relationship. And I mean it not just in kind of the way you interact sexually, but I mean like in who you are and how you show up. If you are inconsistent as a person and you are different to your partner on a Monday morning than you are on a Friday morning, there's a big issue. And that is not okay. I think that people who, from a kind of personality perspective, are inconsistent, people who from a mood perspective are inconsistent, that needs consideration, that needs addressing. Because it makes it very hard in a relationship if you as a partner are constantly on eggshells, not knowing what you're going to get, not knowing what version of your partner is going to walk through the door or, is going to attack you or demand of you. So when it comes to our sense of feeling safe in a relationship, for me, is like, if we're going to put it in an equation, a healthy relationship is connection plus safety plus consistency. I say to clients all the time, I always have work because relationships are hard and sex is not this natural thing that just happens. It requires effort, but equally we have to be consistent with that effort. And at the same time, when we're not able to be consistent, there needs to be an understanding of why we aren't able to be consistent at that time. I spoke as we started this in saying that, if you are a new parent, if you're going through menopause, if you've lost a parent or a loved one, like how are you going to have the ability to be consistently connected to your partner and maintain the effort that you put in outside of those events? How are you going to do date night? How are you going to do little special things for your partner here and there that you maybe consistently do and that show your partner how you feel about them? You aren't. And that isn't a reflection of how you feel about somebody, it's a reflection of what's going on for you. And I love a quote by Jillian Turecki. She's a US relationships expert and author, and she often says like how somebody treats you and their capacity is actually not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on their capacity, not on a reflection of you. And I think that in terms of being consistent in a relationship, that is so valuable, as well as understanding that sometimes it's not possible to be consistent in the way you expect. And I think that if partners, particularly when it comes to sex, can learn to adapt and to renegotiate each time there's a big change, that is the most protective thing for partnerships going forward, for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, what is your stance on foreplay?
So I wish we could redefine it and find a new word. I've been trying to think of a new word for 14 years because foreplay is now synonymous with everything physical, sexual that you do before you have penetration. Most people will, when I say the word sex, most people will think of intercourse, penetrative activity. But actually, foreplay is sex. It's all sex.
It's all, yeah.
It's all, so when I say sex, I mean what most people think of as foreplay. Sex is everything that you do that has a deliberate erotic charge, is how I often speak about it. It has, when we are telling our partner that they looked really good this morning, that has a particular erotic charge, and that can be part of sex, because that might mean that your partner later on that day is feeling, I love that compliment earlier.
You're so right.
I love that they complimented me earlier. That made me feel so good. I'm gonna buy them flowers on the way home, for example, or I'm gonna pick up their favorite dinner on the way home. And then the other partner arrives home with flowers or dinner, and then the partner who sent the text is like, oh, that's so nice, you were thinking of me and that you did that for me. And here we have this continuous exchange that's taking place that is all foreplay, right? And then for me, that's what foreplay is. It's everything we're doing prior to actually having sex, which is what most people think of as foreplay. So for me, if I were to redefine it, foreplay would be everything you do before you physically touch each other. And then sex would be everything you do when you actually engage with one another in a very intentional, erotic way. And I said touch each other, but I would actually include like sexting as well in that.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay. How important is sex as you age? Are there benefits to it post-menopause, especially for women? Maybe
Yeah.
it might be the last thing that they're kind of thinking of, but what are the benefits?
Sex does not stop just because we age.
Yes.
And if you need evidence of that, look at the rates of sexually transmitted infections in old age homes. They have some of the highest incidences of sexually transmitted infections, because sex does not stop just because the elderly are elderly. Our motivation for engaging sexually with somebody changes drastically from Monday to Friday, from 20 to 50, from single to partnered. And across the course of our life, of course, for a woman and for people with female anatomy and organs, hormones play a significant role in how we are experiencing day-to-day life. Now, yes, there is a change hormonally when it comes to menopause, more specifically. Absolutely. And that plays a big role in everything from sexual arousal to sexual desire, to sensation. But actually, some of the biggest influences that have an impact on our experience of sex at that age specifically, and that's kind of like, we're talking anywhere between like 40 and 55. We used to just say 48 to 52. We now know that women in their 40s are actually they're perimenopausal, their hormones are changing already, and then right up until about 55 is the median and the kind of end point. And there's a huge systemic change that is happening at that time, and that can include things like immense brain fog and cognitive, almost like a disconnection that's happening cognitively, which can make a woman feel completely overwhelmed, completely on edge, can make her feel useless or frustrated, which is going to change her nervous system. Not sleeping at night. Oh my gosh, you can speak to any new parent and you can speak to anyone who's not sleeping. It's one of the biggest, we now know, is one of the biggest predictors of chronic illness, the opposite of what we want in longevity and aging. Sleep is the most important thing for you. Absolutely the most important thing. And so if your sleep is disrupted because you are hot, you've got insomnia, your brain is too busy, that is immediately going to impact your interest in having sex, your energy for it, your ability to make effort with your partner and be consistent. And so as we age, it's not that things die out and become impossible, it's that they change. And women who are in their 40s and 50s and 60s actually report that sex is a lot more satisfying because they've stopped caring about what their body looks like. And actually, when you're in your 50s and 60s, they don't worry about falling pregnant anymore. For the first time since they probably started having sex, they no longer have to worry about conceiving. And that's what, males and people with male anatomy have their whole life. They don't have to worry that they're going to be the one to fall pregnant. And a person with male anatomy and a man can conceive a baby up until the time they die. Their sperm is still feasibly, well, I shouldn't say feasibly, but it's still feasible that somebody can conceive. Yeah. And you just look at like rock stars like Mick Jagger and previous people like Hugh Hefner, having babies late in their 80s and so on. So what happens to our functioning is something that is important to consider over the course of our life, because our functioning changes, and it's not just sexually, it's in our body. It is definitely harder now for me to get up off the floor than it was when I was 15, and I have to actively engage in, getting up and down off the floor in order for it to be a familiar thing for me. Now, if you're in a sex position in your 20s that you're going to try again in your 80s, it's probably not going to feel the same. Again, our way in which we understand ourselves sexually needs adaptation across the course of our life. We need to understand how what we do in our 20s and how something feels is probably going to feel very different in our 80s and might need some adaptation, physically, psychologically, socially. But we do not stop seeking connection with another human being. I'm generalizing here, but we do not stop seeking connection with another human being because we're older. Definitely not. If anything, we have a loneliness epidemic in older adults.
So true.
So our needs change. It isn't always specifically about sex. Sometimes it's just about closeness and cuddling and connection
Companionship.
and companionship. Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so last question. What are your thoughts on how anxiety, well, actually, we did touch on this, affects sex?
I'll give you a really useful analogy that I give to my clients and that I've spoken about a lot. Our nervous systems are designed to keep us safe and to tell us there's a threat in front of us. And so if there is a lion running towards us, our nervous system sends messages, our brain and our bodies, to run, to fight, so flight, get away, to go towards and fight it off, or to freeze. And that is like an overwhelm of the system and I don't know what to do, deer in the headlights, I'm stuck, I can't move state. It's like panic, immobilized state. There are some others, but I'll just leave it at that for now. If you have a lion running towards you, your brain and body need they need your muscles to be at an optimal level. They need your blood to be pumping to those limbs and those muscles. They need systems that are going to draw energy away from that function to go offline. So very often, if you just check in with yourself about what anxiety feels like, people will say things like, they get a tightening in their chest. Why? Because they're breathing shallows. They get a pit in their stomach. Why? Because digestion decreases in activity. They might feel pins and needles or a flash of cold, or they might feel cold, or they might feel a flash of hot, and that's because our thermoregulation system decreases in activity. And this is all because we need our muscles and our blood to pump to those muscles to be able to mobilize, to go towards and fight off or to get away from. And so when we have anxiety, usually most people want to run away from something. And so the analogy that I use is if there's a lion running towards you, having an orgasm is not a good use of your body's function. It's really not. It's not, having an orgasm is not going to save you from a lion. And so what happens is that, again, if you are anxious, your brain and body think there is a lion running towards you. It activates your system to say, get away, get away, get away, get away. And so your ability to have an orgasm, to get turned on, to be present in the moment with your partner, to notice sensation, to not be bothered by the buzzing noise outside, goes out the window. And if anything, you do yourself a disservice if you try and if you're expecting yourself to respond sexually when you're anxious. It's really unlikely. It's not from an evolutionary perspective. It's not realistic. It's not realistic. Now, what's happened over the course of humanity is that we don't actually have lions running towards us anymore. That's not generally what happens unless you're off in the Kruger Park. We don't have lions running towards us. But what we do have is the brain saying, I think that's a lion. That looks like a lion. That's a threat. There's a threat. Why? I'm anxious. Is something bad going to happen? And anxiety is all about our future thoughts. It's catastrophic thinking about the future. I think bad's going to happen in the future. And so it's the what if happens and the how will I cope? And then it's the shutdown of the system. And that is a very needed response in our bodies. But if you are anxious, you cannot expect yourself to want sex, to get turned on, and to respond in a way that feels pleasurable to you. It doesn't work like that.
Absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Are there any upcoming events or workshops or collabs coming up in the next 3 months or so?
I have, next 3 months, my goodness. I have, for those academics, I have a textbook chapter coming out in April, which is very exciting, but that's in the academic space. I have an event, but it's being hosted, a private event in Joburg that I'm doing in the next couple of months. And there's something coming up in the UK sometime soon. And at the moment, it's me just trying to recover from doing a PhD. And I must say that speaking at events is one of my favorite things. And I miss speaking, I miss my podcasts and my conversations with my guests. So that's also something that I'm avidly working on at the moment.
Amazing. And contact details if people want to get hold of you after this. So I know your Instagram.
Mm-hmm. So Sexology with Catriona is my Instagram. It's the best place to see what I do, but not to contact me. I find the demand placed on my system by the multiple inboxes I have to check every day, which I think I counted was like 13 the other day, between emails and WhatsApps and Instagram. It's not the best place to contact me. So if you actually want to reach out to me, it's best to do that via my website, catrionaboffard.com, or at my email address, hello@catrionaboffard.com. Those are usually the best ways to reach me. Perfect. And to find me.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Kat. Thank you.